was beating the wind in my eyes. Don't even know what I'll say when I find you.
But today's a bit different. Today is one of those days where I don't know where to start with the news. I know roughly what I want to talk about, but I'm not sure that the issues I want to talk about are necessarily the issues you will want to talk about. And I am suffering from a very, very bad case of Londonitis. I suffer from it occasionally. I don't think I'm the worst offender when it comes to Londonism. But there are days, you know, when I might be telling you about problems with a cycle lane in South London, and I suddenly sort of realise, I wonder whether anybody in Glasgow or Manchester or Liverpool or Birmingham or Leicester or Nottingham or Edinburgh or Dundee or Cardiff or Wrexham or Bristol, does anybody really care about a cycle lane in Stoke Newington? I get a bit of an attack of Londonitis once a month when Sadiq Khan comes into the studio, the Mayor of London, because, of course, his realm extends only to the boundaries of the M25 or thereabouts. And I do sometimes worry about whether or not anybody else gives a hoot. But, of course, the reassurance that one brings into proceedings is that it doesn't really matter what we're talking about during our time together every day. This is what I think, of course. You may completely disagree. It doesn't necessarily, I think how we talk about it matters more than what we talk about. I hope so, at least. I'd like to think that, you know, if we can extract a little bit of illumination or levity from the thinnest of gruel, then it's worth spending our time together. The other side of Londonitis, one of the major symptoms, if not the major symptom of Londonitis, is not the worry about some of the stuff that we talk about in this sort of bubble in the southeast being irrelevant to people elsewhere in the country. The more important symptom of Londonitis is, of course, that we take our eye off events that are not on our own doorstep. I think most obviously and most dangerously that would involve Northern Ireland. And, you know, if we're going to bring the B word into proceedings early, the absolute failure to appreciate or understand the issues. I think we did all right on this show, but the British media in general, the absolute failure to appreciate or understand what that was all going to mean in Northern Ireland, in general, but in Northern Ireland in particular, is absolutely catastrophic and deeply, deeply shameful. Similarly, sometimes with Scotland, and Scottish issues, I think there's a danger of Londonitis leaving us a little bit behind the curve on that. And I think with the so-called Northern Powerhouse or with the HS2, which is big news today, and I think with the care home story, because, you know, the economic distribution in this country tends to have a slightly north-south flavour. So today I'm very conscious of suffering from Londonitis, and I thought that we would have a temporary corrective on the issue. So at 10:15, we'll be speaking to Nigel Harris, the editor of Rail magazine, and really getting our heads around what the expected government announcements mean today. The scrapping of the Leeds HS2 link, very bad news for Bradford, but what does it mean for the whole country? Because if you think of a rail network as a sort of as a bloodstream, if you think of a country as an organism, and then the more blood you can pump into the more corners of that organism, then the healthier that organism becomes, and the more, if you like, bouncy our economy becomes. I think that's pretty clear, but I, for one, am guilty of not really knowing the facts or understanding all the issues. Before we do that, where to begin on some of the other stuff? You may remember yesterday in the House of Commons, we thought that perhaps Keir Starmer had almost tricked Boris Johnson into promising to reveal all of the paperwork linked to the contracts given to a company called Randox. Randox, you'll remember, is one of the companies that was paying Owen Paterson money, and which Owen Paterson then lobbied on behalf of in direct breach of all of the anti-corruption rules in place in Parliament. It's why he was found to be in such egregious breach of those rules. Do you know, you think the travails and the troubles that the government have suffered over the last 2 weeks, if Paterson had just served his 30-day suspension, which would have cost him nothing, if he'd just quietly served his 30-day suspension, it would all have gone away. Quite incredible to reflect upon that level of arrogance and hubris. Not confined, of course, to Patterson. Johnson was four square behind him, although he's desperately backpedalling now, as is Jacob Rees-Mogg, although a few people have pointed out to me it's rather hard to backpedal if you're riding a penny farthing. But you'll remember that yesterday Boris Johnson promised to unveil all of the contracts and all of the paperwork linked to the contracts given to Randox. Randox secured some very, very healthy contracts, and we know that conversations took place between Lord Bethell, Randox and Owen Paterson. It's very hard to work out why, given that Owen Paterson is not allowed to lobby on behalf of Randox, and if Randox were talking to Lord Bethell, who was a health minister at the time, quite why Owen Paterson would be in on that call is a very urgent question that needs to be answered, and of course yesterday we thought for a moment perhaps we'll get the answers, but they can't find the paperwork. I don't know if you saw this story. Gillian Keegan stood up in the House of Commons yesterday and revealed that they couldn't actually currently locate the paperwork. She said, I've been unable to locate a formal note of that meeting. She stressed it was held after any contracts were let with Randox, but of course, if she can't provide the paperwork, then I think people are allowed to sort of wonder which bits are true and which bits are not. And that's incredible. Released later that we haven't lost it, we just don't currently know where it is. Which is right up there, isn't it, with when Keith used to claim that the dog had eaten his homework. Do you remember that, Keith? A regular occurrence. So that's one story that you might be intrigued by. £600 million worth of contracts, by the way, were given to Randox, but the government is unable to find any formal minutes from a call between a health minister, Owen Paterson, and the company. I know what you're thinking. Lord Bethell. He's the bloke who he'll have all the details on his phone, won't he? On the WhatsApp on his phone. No, because they've disappeared as well, unfortunately. It was reported that he lost his phone, or that his phone had been broken. The phone is not lost or broken, but the WhatsApp, he regularly deleted all of his WhatsApp messages. You think I'm making this up, don't you? You think I'm sort of launching a tribute act to Armando Iannucci this morning. The reason he gave for constantly deleting his WhatsApp messages was to free up space on his phone. Now, I don't know what model phone you've got, but when's the last time you needed, and bearing in mind also he sits in the House of Lords and he's got a few bob. He's a baron, no less. What he used to work for the Ministry of Sound nightclub empire, which was owned by his cousin. We want to know a little bit more, don't we? I suspect. So we've got that story. Then the social care betrayal. That's not my headline, that's the Daily Mail's headline. Speaking of the Daily Mail, astonishing really to reflect upon the last 2 or 3 weeks and the way they've led the field in criticising the government and bringing about that U-turn involving Owen Paterson. So you may not be massively surprised to learn that the editor got the flick yesterday. The Daily Mail has a new editor who is very much in the style of the last editor but one, Paul Dacre, and therefore I suspect that the feet being held to the fire, Boris Johnson's feet being held very close to the fire by the Daily Mail in recent weeks, I suspect that those days are now over. I would love nothing more than to be proved wrong, but time alone will tell. And then you've got what I think might be, in fact, I'm not going to play this to you yet. I think we've got the perfect illustration of the modern Conservative Party and its attitude to you, to themselves, and to money. Right? I think we might, thanks to an MP called Andrew Rosindell, I think we might have found the most perfect illustration of really what they stand for and what they believe. He's kind of said out loud the bits that you're not supposed to say out loud. And that, again, is just one of them. And finally, before we head towards the break, and then we'll get stuck into railways, slightly different flavour to the show this morning. No real call to arms on the phones yet, although if you want to book your place to tell me how the HS2 story, or why the railway story is important to you, how this is going to affect your life. For example, I'd be quite happy today to take calls almost exclusively from Bradford on how badly you feel you've been treated. 03456060973. So many people, it seems to me, don't really understand what HS2 is about. The name wasn't helpful, high speed, when really this is about increasing capacity. But the idea would be, and I would have thought that lockdown would have brought this home, that the modern model of work is not the only way of doing things. There might be an argument to say, well, we don't actually need it as much as we used to need it because so many people have discovered they can work from home. But if you still want your home to have decent transport links, we'll get stuck into that shortly. But do you remember a couple of weeks ago when I suggested to you that the reason why they'd got away with so much for so long was because Get Brexit Done had become a blindfold and a pair of earmuffs. And the Owen Paterson story was the first time that they couldn't just shout Get Brexit Done at the top of their voices and make the bad stuff go away, make the naughty stories go away. Do you remember that? Of course you remember it. It's had 2.5 million views on Twitter alone. So everything from proroguing Parliament unlawfully, from sending Jacob Rees-Mogg to Balmoral to mislead the Queen, Dominic Cummings' ludicrous eye test lies, whatever the appalling treatment of the British public may have been because of the emotion tied up in Brexit. They could just say, well, get Brexit done. We got Brexit done. Don't look over there, look over here. And then the Owen Paterson story, for my money, was the first time that stopped working. Well, I'm obliged to tell you that just because it stopped working doesn't mean they've stopped using it. Have a little listen to Dominic Raab being questioned by Naga Munchetty on the BBC this morning, because if you thought I was exaggerating about the desperation with which they'll play the Get Brexit Done card, I suspect that this will address any scepticism you may have been fostering.
Do you have faith in the Prime Minister's judgment? There is many people, including people from your own party, who believe that the Prime Minister's judgment is lacking.
No, I've got total faith as a Prime Minister that has successfully dealt with getting us through Brexit.
Even I, good old Dominic Raab, even I wouldn't have been able to script something that proves my point as completely as that does. How do you feel about the absolute car crash? Not my phrase, the Prime Minister's phrase. The absolute car crash that the Prime Minister has managed to execute in the last 2 weeks, Deputy Prime Minister. Well, got Brexit done. Just doesn't work anymore, does it? So what's going to happen next? I do not know. Well, I do know what's going to happen next on this programme. We're going to get stuck into HS2. Keir Starmer yesterday, of course, pushed the Prime Minister to confirm or deny the mooted scrapping of the so-called Leeds leg of HS2. The Prime Minister refused to respond and said, wait and see. Well, we've waited and now we can see. It would appear that that is toast, and various other ramifications of today's announcements constitute what doesn't appear to be particularly good news for the north of England. But don't take my word for it. Nigel Harris is the managing editor of Rail magazine. I noticed on Twitter earlier that he was a little bit unhappy to be dropped at the last minute by another radio station. So I invited him onto this programme and he replied, if you're genuinely interested in the real issues, James, then yes, because this is too important to millions of people for anything else. And I'm delighted to tell you that Nigel joins me now. Nigel, I'll begin with the why. Why is this so important to millions of people?
Because it is the whole levelling up thing was absolutely required, and this is a plan that's been 15 years in the making. That's on the brink of being done. We've committed on the western leg, and now the most transformative part of it, the bit that drives all the benefits throughout the HS network and the country as a whole, has been scrapped. It literally, and the life chances, the job chances, the economic chances, the opportunity for millions of people is being blighted at a stroke.
Just talk us through what was supposed to happen in layman's terms and what is going to happen instead.
Okay, there was a Y-shaped network that went from London up to Birmingham and then on to Manchester. And then there was the other arm of the Y turned off up the eastern pole through the East Midlands that went through Sheffield around Sheffield to Leeds. Now, the whole point of it is to take, it's never been anything about speed. It has never been about saving a few minutes to Birmingham. But because of the way the government managed the communications in the early days, that myth took root and they've been beating over the head of the public with it ever since. It's about capacity. If you take off all the fast trains off the West Coast Main Line, the Midland Main Line from St Pancras and from King's Cross, and you segregate them onto the Y network, you take literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of trains off those main lines, which are already running very much at capacity. What that then allows you to do is to use, so for example, there's 4 trains an hour currently, or before the pandemic, from Euston to Manchester, running at 125 miles an hour. They eat capacity because they need a lot of space in front of them for safety, for stopping and all the rest of it. So you take all them off and you create acres and acres and acres of, if you like, new railway on those three main lines, and you can fill that capacity with a new interurban passenger service, say, because when you're running long distance main lines from, say, Euston to Manchester, then you can't keep stopping them at places like Milton Keynes and everywhere else because they're not fast trains anymore. So that takes even more capacity. So if you take all those away, with modern trains that accelerate and brake very quickly, you could put a world-beating interurban service in the space that they have vacated, and you can run much more freight. And we've all seen with the shortage of lorry drivers and all the climate stuff and the emissions, we desperately need to get more goods on the railway. This paved the way for that. It's all made possible by HS2. And if we don't do the HS2 eastern section, you pull the keystone out of that arch and the whole thing collapses. Away from those main lines, any cities like, let's say, Nottingham, Derby, Sheffield, places like Grantham, Retford, even Peterborough, all the regional services which feed into those big city hubs are already struggling because of all the fast trains at those places, busily going back to King's Cross, Euston and what have you. If you keep those fast trains on those lines, the situation is going to get worse for regional traffic, not better, which is why my blood boiled this morning when I heard Dominic Raab using regional interconnectivity as the reason for doing this, because regional interconnectivity is one of the biggest victims. Either he's being disingenuous or he's stupid. I don't say those two are mutually exclusive, but whatever, the British people who pay for all this and whose lives are going to be impacted are not being told the truth.
So, I mean, strong words for Dominic Raab, who, of course, isn't here to defend himself, but under your understanding and your pretty clear explanation, regional interconnectivity is going to be grossly reduced by today's revamp compared to what would have been achieved by the original plan.
Ultimately, yes, because East Midlands, North East, Yorkshire are now stuck forever with their already restrictive passenger services. And they are not going to get better because those fast trains that occupy the hubs are going to stay there. There will be more of them. So it is going to get worse, not better. And what makes this, why the people of Yorkshire need to be, and the East Midlands and the North East need to be, who said in the streets about this, is that HS2 was supposed to address the north-south divide.
Yes.
What we've actually added is an east-west divide now, because the western part of HS2, which is being built, will bring all the benefits I've just been talking to the western half of the country served by the West Coast Main Line. And they are going to be denied to Yorkshire, the East Midlands and the North East. Now, what the government is saying to those regions is, you are not worth investing in. Sorry, the word still is missing there, because let me put a bit of context. The latest figures for 2017-18 show that transport investment in per capita in the East Midlands is the lowest in the country. It was £245 in 2017 to 18, compared with, guess what, £1,019 in London, 4 times as much. So it's just getting worse. The government is thumbing their nose at the people at the eastern side of the country, while the western side is going to. So we've now got an east-west divide as well as a north-south. This decision is an act of the most mind-numbing stupidity. It's just utterly moronic. It beggars belief.
And yet, I sense I can predict your response to this, but one newspaper reports today, Boris Johnson hailed it as the biggest transport investment programme in a century and said no town or city would be left behind.
Well, no town or city will be unaffected, but they'll all be left behind. Because of the ripple effect of the way HS2 was meant to be the hub of a completely new way of addressing transport right around the country. Now, look, that Y-shaped network, if you look back to the canals, it's there. the A roads and the motorways, they are natural travel corridors. And as each new generation of transport has come along, from the cart track to the canal, to the railways, to the motorways, they've all followed those corridors. And we've decided we're not going to do so. And the reasons we've been given are they're dishonest, they're disingenuous, they just aren't true. It will not get better. This is catastrophic, James.
I have a much clearer understanding of that than I did before I spoke to you, but I still wonder, is there an even vaguely more charitable reading of what the motivation might be? Could they perhaps, there might be things that they don't want to say out loud, like we can't afford it or we need to save them. I mean, it can't be, I know this is a little bit Emperor's New Clothes, Nigel Harris, but it can't surely be quite as crass as you're describing it, this decision.
Well, feel free to go and talk to some other people who know what they're doing. I think you'll get a similar view.
Yes.
But yes, it is as crass. Now, your earlier point, actually, if they'd just said there's been a pandemic, we can't afford it, I'd have more respect for that.
Right.
But they're trying to clothe this and say it will be better. I mean, there's an old saying I won't say completely out loud, like, don't what's it on my boots and try to tell me it's raining.
Yes.
That is what's going on. And if they did say we can't afford it, then there are any number of really compelling arguments. So you can say, well, we can afford to spend more per mile on the Lower Thames road crossing, or the billions in the road programme that we've got, or whatever your chosen thing is. So yes, there's competing priorities for finance. I get that. But railway engineers and planners are very good at squeezing value out of every last pound when they absolutely need to. And that could have happened, but that's not why we're being told this. And that is almost as, we don't believe the Prime Minister's stupid, which means you must think that we are, because the reasons that we're being given to people who absolutely understand. And what you might like to do as well, just look at the consensus of opinion around what I've been saying. Transport for the North. All the newspapers across that belt of England, from Liverpool to Hull, they agreed on a common front page, arguing all these things. Now, I've been a journalist for 40 years. I can never remember regional newspapers collaborating like that. Andy Burnham, Steve Rotherham in Liverpool, Andy in Birmingham, his name escapes me, the mayor, Dan Jarvis in Sheffield. These people cannot and are not all wrong. The amount of money that Midlands Connect has invested on planning a hub transport system around HS2 at Tottenham is amazing, and they've done a fantastic job, and it's all been flushed down the loo.
Well, I mean, you've taken me right up to the 10:30 news. I sort of just wonder. I had a sense I wasn't going to make much of a contribution to this conversation.
Sorry about that.
No, I love it. I really do. I'm here to learn. I mean, before we go to the news, is there anything we've missed out? Is there anything else you want to add to the record?
It is a complete waste of money, because what they've done is that, as well as they've saved a few bob, but the western part, which is being built now and can't be stopped and all the rest of it, has just turned into a West Coast mainline bypass. So they've harmed the business case for that as well. This is catastrophic, James. It really is.
Is it Andy Street? Is that the fellow?
Andy Street.
There we go. Got there. Hey, I've made one contribution to this conversation. Nigel Harris, the managing editor of Rail Magazine. I sense we'll talk again, and we should probably have talked before, but many thanks for the sort of crash course in the reality of what today's announcement appears to represent. It's hard to know what question to ask you, but I'm going to follow the spirit of my colleagues on the newspapers that Nigel referred to right across the north, and I'm going to ask you from those areas, from Liverpool to Hull and everywhere in between, particularly perhaps to the East Midlands. I want you to explain to a smug southerner, right, why this mattered, why this is the cocking of an almighty snook to the so-called red wall, or whatever you want to call it. Why this mattered to you? Because I've now got the overview from Nigel, the analysis, if you like, but now I want the individual, the personal, as opposed perhaps to the political. You're in Bradford, you're in Nottingham, you had you haven't been staying up all night studying the details and the plans, but you had a broad idea of the difference this was going to make to your area. I want to know what that difference was, and I want to know how you feel today about having had it taken away. And as Nigel Harris was far too diplomatic to say, but I can, because I can find the correct euphemism, does it feel like Boris Johnson is piddling on your shoes while telling you that it's raining? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. So You in Derby, in Nottingham, in Sheffield, in Leeds, in York, in Bradford, in Huddersfield, you were expecting, in a way, your life to change, and now you've been told it isn't going to. Tell me what that change was, and tell me how you feel. Two things. Number one, I'm going to have a crack at explaining what I think is going on here. Well, three things. Number one, I'm going to have a crack at explaining what I think might be going on here. Having listened to Nigel Harris's very passionate condemnation of the rail announcements expected today, the abandonment, if you like, of the Northern Powerhouse Rail, then I'm going to need your help in knowing whether or not my analysis is correct. Actually, just those two things, because don't shout at me yet. All right. I think the political calculation must be that you don't care enough. And actually, when you speak to somebody who is clearly neck deep in the detail, like the managing editor of Rail magazine, you get a very, very different picture from the one that has been presented. And remember, I speak as a smug southern softie. Softie's not right. What's the word I want? Just as a sort of as a smug southerner. So it gets presented to me as, oh, they're knocking down houses in historic villages, or people who own property near King's Cross are very unhappy about it. And that's how it's been presented to me. I only absorb the news from the same sources that you do. So I wonder whether we're back to the country's had enough of experts. And the calculation is, you remember what happened last time we were told the country had had enough of experts. The calculation is that although you're welcome to challenge Nigel Harris's analysis, if you so desire, 0345 6060973, the calculation by government is that the people in these places won't care because they haven't really ever got, and I could be completely wrong on this might be the smug southerner coming to the absolute fore, and I love local newspapers. My dad cut his teeth on some of the newspapers that did get involved in this region-wide, right across the top of the country's, top of England's regions, every front page, every newspaper uniting to condemn this move, but they don't wield the power that they used to wield. The government's calculation is that they can do this to you and you either won't notice or won't care. 0345 6060973. It could be that they're right. You don't know what you've got till it's gone, as Joni Mitchell famously sang, but you don't know what you've lost if you never had it in the first place. I think that's the calculation. That's just me failing to resist the urge to try to work stuff out. Because when you hear an account like Nigel Harris's, you sort of think, well, this is absolutely ridiculous. How on earth could they possibly expect to get away with this? And you see Conservative MPs in northern constituencies up in arms. You see a rare example of unanimity coming from all of the regional newspapers. You sit here in your studio in London and you think, well, how? And you have a bit of a history of being the boy in the crowd pointing at the naked emperor and wondering why everybody else can't see his quivering buttocks. You sit here and you think, well, how is this? And you think, well, the calculation must be that you're not going to care, which means my calls for the next 20 minutes or so have to come from affected regions. And breaking one of my own golden rules, you are welcome to call me and tell me that you don't care. 0345 6060973. The calculation is that the people of Leeds, the people of York, the people of Bradford, the people of Nottingham, the people of Derby, the people of Sheffield and elsewhere. And then, of course, you've got the Leeds to Manchester line also being scrapped. The calculation is that you don't know enough about this to realise what you've just lost. And I don't know quite how we're going to examine that effectively, but you know me, I'm nothing if not a trier. 0345 6060973 is the number you need. Mark's in Nottingham, so he's allowed on. Mark, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Good to talk to you. After listening to you for the last few years.
Welcome aboard. It's a train pun, that. Yeah, sorry.
I don't think he should get away with it, but I think that he will.
Yes.
And I think that that's an absolute disgrace. And I think the thing that bothers me the most is not necessarily that I won't get to London 10 minutes quicker on a train.
It's not that, is it? It's that you would have had a seat. You could have sat down and you could have... Well, it's capacity more than speed. You could have commuted from Nottingham to London on a regular basis without any particular difficulty or inconvenience.
That may well be the case. As someone who doesn't rely on the trains as often as my best friend does, I don't necessarily feel the pinch points in the way that he might. But he also articulates a view of, well, actually, it would have only got him to London 10 minutes quicker if he'd have picked the right train. My biggest concern is, and this isn't necessarily about people in sort of stately homes or anything like that, there are a lot of people in the area where I live who were facing very real prospect of losing their homes. We're not talking about people who are particularly well off. We're talking about people just managing to get by, forced out of homes because the track was going to go right through their living room. And now it isn't. My question is, I suppose, how many people will have already lost their homes and they won't get them back, but the track's not going to happen. So it's the ultimate insult.
But they've already been priced into the calculation, haven't they? They've already been hugely alienated by the plan to do it. So scrapping the plan to do it isn't suddenly going to make them more alienated or more angry with the current government. So, I mean, if I'm obsessed with these ideas of cynical calculations. They're just ballast, aren't they? They're just collateral damage that isn't going to swing one way or the other, according to today's announcement. They might end up even crosser with the people in charge than they were before, but they were already cross with the people in charge before. Ergo, no votes lost.
I think you've anticipated what I was about to say. And if I were in that position, I'd be absolutely outraged.
Yeah.
And I'd be livid. And the sad thing is that these people probably live in places where their votes haven't counted for much over the last few years, and so it doesn't really make much of a difference, as you said. It'll still just get in because...
Yeah, I mean, this is the weird bit, because, there are a lot of constituencies in the relevant areas. I haven't broken it down along that east-west divide that Nigel Harris just described for us, where these are not big majorities. They're not the big enough majorities where you think you can go off and work 80 hours a month for an investment bank and then squeak something silly about how if my constituents aren't happy about it, they can vote me out at the next election. These are wafer thin. These are wafer thin majorities, and they appear, the Conservatives holding those seats for the first time in history in many cases, they appear to have just been absolutely shafted, which means the calculation must be people aren't going to care or notice. I can't see what else the calculation is.
I do feel for them because I live in a constituency where the MP turns up literally only when it's time to campaign, and then she disappears again. She's been vaccines minister for God knows how long, and she's done one interview. But she'll still probably get elected next time.
Yes. Well, we shall see. So, again, you reluctantly endorse my suggestion that the calculation might just be that the way the whole HS2 story has unfolded and been reported means that their calculation is they can stick it all on the scrap heap and people won't understand or know enough about it to get as cross as the people who do know about it think they should be.
Yeah, and the sad thing is actually what they could have done is put the money into, I think it was Andy Burnham suggesting sort of not that long ago or not that many years ago, that money could have been used to create better connectivity between the cities in the north, and that would have had a more.
Well, they've scrapped that as well. I mean, it's one of my it's one of my favourite railway journeys actually from York or Leeds across to Manchester. It's absolutely beautiful, but that was going to be replaced or upgraded, and it isn't anymore. They were going to put a new line in there, and they're not anymore. They're going to revamp the one that is already there. It's coming up to 10:45. Resisting the urge to pat myself on the back, but if you're trying to do Occam's razor on this, if you're trying to you absorb all of the available facts, and how the hell can they be doing something so stupid? The calculation must be, as Nigel Harris suggested to us, they must think you're stupid, too stupid to realise what they're taking away from you. And part of the reason that you won't realise what they're taking away from you is because you've never had it yet. I don't know. Tell me why I'm wrong. I'd quite like to be wrong, although I'm getting rather bored of telling you how desperate I am to be wrong while I keep getting proved right. So I have no idea what they are intending to say, and some of them may just have got a wrong number, or they might be ringing in to complain about your humble correspondent. But my switchboard currently has numbers ringing from Derby, from Huddersfield, from Leeds, from Wigan, from Leeds, from Newcastle under Lyme, which is in Staffordshire, of course, from Leeds and from Leicester. I've just had an email from Chesterfield referring me to a report released by Chesterfield Borough Council entitled "Don't Cut Here," looking at the benefits of HS2 East, which was promised by the government and today is expected to be axed, and it talks of how the economies of both Chesterfield and Sheffield need HS2 in full, rather than implementing the National Infrastructure Commission report, which considers putting HS2 East into the sidings. The report focuses on the job opportunities for the borough, which states that due to the closure of mines and heavy engineering job losses during the late 20th century, as well as the 2008 economic recession, there are 5,000 fewer jobs in the region than there were in 1998. 8. And this was perceived quite widely as a way of easing those burdens, improving those lives. And today they axe it. So what's the calculation? My suggestion is they're fairly confident you don't know enough about it to care enough about it to deliver your judgment politically. James is in Leeds. James, what can you tell us?
Hiya, James.
Hello,
First time caller, so go easy on me.
Of course I will. Welcome.
Basically, I've worked on rail for like 25 years now as a railway technician, fixing trains and such like. Obviously, the actual the money's not being spent up north. Major projects I started in 2007 on the Transpennine trains. They were on about doing the Manchester to York electrification at that point. Obviously, they've started it now, but it's sort of heading towards York, toward Leeds. They've got the stanchions up there, for the overheads and whatnot.
Yes.
But obviously, it's still the massive thing because it's going through the bridges and stuff like that towards.
So people who use the railways must know how dire the situation is, and yet the calculation today is that they can essentially abandon plans to revolutionise and immeasurably improve the system without suffering any political damage.
No, it's like the East Coast Main Line, for instance.
Yes.
I work on that. Basically, the overhead lines are like spaghetti, and obviously the points and the track is just shot. So basically, you could actually improve that and actually get the actual network faster, and it'd skip a load of time off your journey times to start, because the trains can actually go faster than what stipulated now.
Well, the infrastructure is holding them back, is it?
Yeah, well, you could put ETCS in across the network, then what you'd actually do then, you'd actually you get more trains into sections, if that makes sense.
It does make up to a point for a layman.
Yes.
This idea, we've heard about the Northern Powerhouse, we've heard about the Red Wall, we've heard about levelling up, and this seems to me to be one of the first opportunities for the government to literally put money where its mouth is, and they've decided not only to keep their hands in their pockets, but to take back some of the money that had previously been promised. So, I mean, how does that reach you in Yorkshire?
It doesn't surprise me, if I'm honest with you.
No.
It's a bit of a shame because they do sort of like got narrow-minded as to where to spend the money and stuff. So I wasn't surprised by what's coming at dinner time. I think, is it dinner time when it comes up with it?
I think so, yeah, maybe a little earlier.
So
Grant Shouts expected to confirm HS2 linking Manchester and Leeds is being ditched, and the eastern leg of HS2 linking Birmingham to Nottingham, Sheffield and Leeds will also be axed. I mean, listening to Nigel Harris, it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever.
No, like I say, it's a bit of a shame, but like I said, if they actually apportioned the money across, it would make it better for everywhere if you actually looked differently. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of HS2 because I think if the cost of it,
yes,
I think the money could be going all over. Like I say, track renewals, all new rolling stock everywhere. And
we've seen, budgets and what have you. It's funny, isn't it, that they're balking at the cost of this and not mentioning that, as I would be tempted to scream from the rooftops, £37 billion largely wasted on that test and trace system. And we're only now beginning to learn about the sheer scale of cash that's gone into the pockets of cronies and donors for PPE contracts, including individuals walking away with tens of millions of pounds. So, the question of for whom do they govern assumes a rather frightening new resonance today. They don't govern, it would seem, for the people of Leeds, for the people of Nottingham, Derby, Leicester, wherever else you want to go on this line. They govern for themselves and their friends. James, thank you. It's a lovely debut. Don't know what you were worried about. Just briefly, if you're having a bad day at work, if you've lost something really important, you could possibly take a leaf out of Gillian Keegan's book. She's the Minister of State for Care and Mental Health, but she was talking about the records of conversations between Randox, which got £600 million worth of those so-called COVID contracts, Owen Paterson, who was being paid a ton of money by them, despite not being allowed to lobby. Of course, he broke those rules, which is why we've been through what we've been through over the last couple of weeks, and a chap called Jim Bethell, or Baron Bethell to his mates, who sits in the House of Lords, so he is, I guess, an unelected bureaucrat. And I know that you thought you'd voted to get rid of unelected bureaucrats like Dominic Cummings and Lord Bethell and Lord Goldsmith and, of course, Lord Frost, the scourge of unelected bureaucrats everywhere, Lord Frost. The minutes have apparently sort of gone AWOL. So if you've lost something really important at work today, here's the excuse that you need, and it's government endorsed.
Mr. Speaker, if we had that information, does she know?
I mean, obviously the honourable gentleman knows that I personally was not there at the time, but the meeting that he refers to was a courtesy call from the Minister to Randox to discuss RNA extraction kits. That was declared on the ministerial register of calls and meetings, and I've been unable to locate a formal note of that meeting. But all the other notes that are available with regard to this, and that meeting, by the way, was after any contracts were let with Randox, which I will get on to.
Point of order, Angela Riedel.
Mr. Speaker, we've just heard the Minister saying that there are no minutes to this so-called courtesy call. Can you, Mr. Speaker, tell us what, as members of the House, we can do upon learning this through this House, given the astonishing nature of the revelation that the Minister has just made, that there have been meetings with no minutes that are official, that involve government ministers, and she is unable to locate a copy of what is clearly a meeting that happened.
Staggering. 10:56 is the time. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. So just, well, we lost it, but don't worry. It was utterly uncontroversial anyway, but we've lost it, so we can't prove it. Back to the railways. Jeff's in Wigan. Jeff, what do you reckon?
Hi, morning, James.
Hello, Jeff.
Yeah, I'm so disappointed what's going on with this, with it, not just HS2 but HS3. And do you know what? I'm sure it is misinformation, and you're right. Because I was struggling this morning when I read a snippet, and we've got chaps up there saying that, of course we're interested in all. Of course, so how can you actually say that? It's a complete lie when you are taking the action you are. And, this isn't recent. It goes back to 2014, if I remember correctly, when they first promised that we would have the East-West link. And again, can we correct, there's misinformation out there that it's Manchester to Leeds. No, it's not. The North West goes from Liverpool across to Hull, up to Newcastle. But again, they trumpet it as Manchester to Leeds.
Yeah.
There's so much more could be done for Liverpool and for Bradford and other cities.
So what's the calculation then? That's the weird thing. I know, and I don't want to reach for the get Brexit done blindfold again, but they did manage to smuggle through all sorts of madness and nonsense under that slogan. But that's not, it's got a shelf life. That's not going to last forever. Why are people in the cities you mentioned today, why does the government think they're not going to be sufficiently perturbed by this to inflict any political damage? They must be calculating that, I think.
I think so. And, I as a freelance IT contractor, I travel all over the north, west, north, east, even London, on rail. Prefer it rather than car.
Sure, me too.
I talk to some very clever friends who are damn sight clever in IT than I am, who constantly come back with a comment that we don't need HS2 because we don't need to get to London 10 minutes quicker. It's not actually about that. But that's the information that gets drip-fed out. It's actually about capacity. And HS2 will free up capacity, not just on the West Coast main line, but on 3 main lines. And that would actually be far cheaper than trying to expand those existing 3 lines.
And you can take lorries off the road, you can alleviate some of the haulage shortages, environmental impact. It's never landed though, Jeff. I've got to tell you, I don't think I am going to beat myself up for being a smug southerner. If it's not landed in my studio, that's one thing. But if it's not landed in Wigan, if it's not landed in Leeds, then that's a much bigger deal. It's just not landed, has it?
It is, and when I say it goes back to 2014, the government back then announced that they would address the east-west problem, and the biggest problem in the east-west is a bottleneck of tracks at Manchester, in the Manchester area.
Yes.
In fact, it's the biggest bottleneck in the UK.
Is it?
They promised back in 2014 to affect that. There's 4 lines. Sorry, I'll keep it quick. And they've promised about 5 times since then to address it and never have. And it even goes back to a misinformation fiasco that they got rid of the Arriva contract over because they increased the timetable through there. They couldn't cope with the capacity they had then. So increasing the timetable to more trains was a complete non-starter.
Because they didn't have the rails to do it, and this was designed to do that. Jeff, you've got a dog that needs walking. Thank you for the call. Have a great day. It's just going back to 11 o'clock. After the break, I think I've got the best accidental explanation yet of what they do actually stand for. The current government. I'm always at pains to say that the nature of the current Conservative Party is unique. It's not like it was when there was room in the party for people like Rory Stewart or even Philip Hammond. But of course there is no room in the current party for people like that. But I think I've got one of the best explanations so far of what they actually stand for. Because as we discuss at the HS2 story, you wonder who do they represent? Who do they look after? It's not the people they tell us they care about, because they told us they cared about the North, the Northern powerhouse. So who do they care about? And you'd be struggling this week not to answer, well, donors and cronies, really. Which, as you know, for me, since time immemorial, always begs the question, why do you go along with this? Why do you doff your cap and tug your forelock when they are picking your pocket and laughing at you? You know, I think the day I hang up my headphones is the day that I stop getting angry about stuff like that. I knew what those 2 clips contained of Andrew Rosendale, the MP for Romford, describing the colleagues he has in the House of Commons earning tens, if not hundreds of thousands of pounds on the side as being human beings with responsibilities and families, which is why it would be so outrageous to expect them to concentrate on doing their job as an MP, while the poorest people in the country can easily do without that universal credit uplift of 20 quid a week because they don't really need it anyway. I knew exactly what it contained. I'd already watched the clips before we came on air. And yet, playing them to you, I say angry, but actually it breaks something, doesn't it? Or it bends something. It's that notion of shared humanity being ridden over in such a roughshod fashion by people who are actually in power. And yeah, I was right. You don't have to check where he stood on the B word. Of course you don't. Just making everything worse while patting yourself on the back for being such a genius. And the weirdest thing at the moment, of course, is the fact that Johnson has proved this week that nobody's safe from his self-regard. He's now thrown Jacob Rees-Mogg under the bus. I mean, literally, well, not literally, obviously, but Jacob Rees-Mogg forced to stand up in Parliament and announced what a brilliant idea it was to tear up the rule book on corruption because they had to look after Owen Paterson, and 2 weeks later forced to stand up in Parliament and announce what a brilliant idea it was not to tear up the rule book on corruption and to send Owen Paterson off into political oblivion. Now, I'm not expecting many people to feel sorry for Jacob Rees-Mogg, any more than I'm expecting Andrew Rosendale to feel any sympathy for the poorest people in the country. He's too busy feeling sorry for people like Geoffrey Cox and Owen Paterson. But if Johnson will do it to Rees-Mogg, just imagine how high up in his priorities you are. And if you're in the North, I suspect that today you're getting a fairly clear picture of where you sit, but not clear enough because this HS2 story doesn't land. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Can we broaden it out a bit, actually? I'm going to continue because we've got Mystery Hour coming up at 12, so I can stretch my legs a little. Grant Shapps is in the House of Commons at the moment. There's another one, of course, that historians of the future are going to go, this bloke flogged quite odd products on the internet under a false name while a Conservative MP, and under the Conservative Party of Boris Johnson, he ended up in the cabinet. He actually got promoted. Imagine if you got busted. I mean, you just run out of superlative sometimes. Anyway, he's the Secretary of State for Transport. He's on his feet in the House of Commons announcing the stuff that we've been talking about all morning. Theo will bring us up to speed with developments. I hope he's made a mug out of me I hope that they have actually announced today that we're keeping it all. I don't know what that lot are getting their knickers in a twist about. Everything's going to be... It seems unlikely, though, given that Boris Johnson spokespeople briefed the Daily Mail that this was going ahead. Well, briefed all the media. But I always think if I was in power, one day I'd just do that. Just for, clicks and giggles. I'd just tell the news, we're abandoning that policy. And then everyone will have an absolute hissy fit about it, and then I'd stand up in the House of Commons. I don't know where people got that idea from. We're pressing on. We're full steam ahead. Train pun. Full steam ahead with HS2, and we all look like absolute mugs. As it is, of course, it's the people that think that they're on their side who are made to look like mugs every single day, but somehow still don't realise it. Including now Jacob Rees-Mogg. He's made Jacob Rees-Mogg look like a mug. Not massively difficult task, I grant you, but still probably unexpected in the forelock tugging sections of society. 22 minutes after 11. So I'm going to carry on treating my Londonitis, talking about railways, but talking also about the broader question of whether or not, in the way that many people in Scotland feel, people in the north of England, the northeast, the northwest, do. I mean, it is odd, isn't it, given the result of the last general election? But this message today, does it sound like a cocking of a snook? And before I talk to Jordan, who's in Sheffield, I'll just read you this from Andrew. He says, James, and I'm guilty of this, despite being born in Derby, adopted in Nottingham, dad from Leeds, mum from Sheffield. I'm guilty of this. Grew up in the Midlands, grew up in Kidderminster. I am guilty of what Andrew describes. He says, James, one of the big problems is how much of the country gets lumped in with the North when they are considering funding and transport. Where I live is the same distance from Manchester as London is from Nottingham. If politicians said they were investing in London by building something in Nottingham, there would be an outcry. But they're perfectly happy saying they're funding the North by building in Manchester. The short answer is they don't care about anyone outside the M25, which might be true, but the results of the last general election suggest that not everybody sees it the way you see it, Andrew, albeit, of course, with the constant caveat of what the alternative was. Whether you like it or not, the people of the north of England did not think much of the alternative. 23 minutes after 11 is the time. Jordan is in Sheffield. If he's still awake, we'll find out why he picked up the phone. Jordan, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Lovely to speak to you again. I work for a company that owns numerous train operators.
Okay.
As a customer service agent. Right. And I will tell you now, currently we receive hundreds of complaints a day, thousands in a week.
Yeah, we could compare notes on this. I do pretty well. I haven't checked the Ofcom diaries lately, but I think I can probably see your complaints and raise you a few. But carry on. I'm joking. Carry on.
So the announcement today that the HS2 sort of leg between Sheffield and Leeds and Wavy was getting cancelled is actually quite a downer from my sort of work perspective, because, for example, if one of our trains breaks down, we have to shove a load of passengers onto the next available service. People who have booked onto that service and cannot get their seat are entitled to get compensation from us, and that's a complaint that I end up having to deal with. And if there's a HS2 line there, as everyone says, it's the increased capacity, the likelihood of that happening is just reduced dramatically. And I think what's going to happen is you're just going to end up with the same situation as we are now, and it's not going to get resolved. And this smart ticketing idea is no fix for any.
What's that? Just quickly, bring me up to speed with the smart ticketing idea.
I think believe the announcement, they will be putting smart ticketing, so smart cards that you can use on the National Rail that are mainly in the south of England.
So we've kind of got that on elements of TfL services here with the Oyster card, or you can use your bank card or your Apple Pay or whatever it is just to click through, and so you can't use that on National Rail. So something similar to that, extending a little bit further. So you, as in a way, you'd like to be talking yourself out of a job today. You would like to have a rail service that prompts so few complaints that you'd have to find something else to do.
Oh, yeah, that'd be lovely.
And today is not a good day for that ambition.
No, not at all. Not at all.
All right, let's play top trumps on complaints then. Have you ever had a personal complaint from the Secretary of State for Transport demanding that you get sacked by your employer?
No.
Right, I win.
Can't say that, huh?
I win.
What if I meet you with a complaint from the Liberal Democrats?
The entire Liberal Democrats?
I think it was I'll have to get there. It was on Twitter. It came from the Liberal Democrats' Twitter, but it was a complaint about our handling of complaints, shall we say?
Fair enough. And of course, the more the complaints, the harder it is to do your job. I got a family member who's in customer services, and it's close to thankless actually, which is why we should all try, if we have a happy experience with people like Jordan, just to take a moment to acknowledge that and to say thank you properly. And just briefly, actually, before you go, this theory that I've developed thanks to my callers and thanks to Nigel Harris this morning, albeit that you deal with the front line of this, with the people complaining, the people who aren't using trains at the moment but would use trains under HS2 are kind of the mythical constituency here. How is the government getting away with such an epic betrayal? Answer: because people don't realise they've been betrayed. Does that hold water with you?
I don't think that's a general. You can't apply that to the general term of the North. But what I would say,
no, of course,
is I don't think any people in the north of England would be shocked that a London-based government is no longer spending money in the north of England. It's quite a regular occurrence for us up here, and so
here we are. Here we are, still counting the broken bricks in what used to be called the Red Wall. Jordan, thank you very much indeed. 27 minutes after 11 is the time. John's in Newcastle under Lyme. John, what would you like to say?
Yes, hello, James.
Hello, John.
Yeah, since this was proposed back in the days of Lord Adonis, yes, I've been very much against it because I don't think it was ever thought through. And like all these big projects, I'm fairly cynical.
Well, did you hear? I mean, I appreciate we all have different perspectives, but did you hear the managing editor of Rail magazine, who spent 30 years studying and reporting on these matters?
Yeah, well, he's got a reason for his views, hasn't he, as well? It could be that he's biased, and most of us are.
Well,
basically, though...
I'm not going to let you just... No, you know how this show works. I'm not going to let you just gloss over that. So, I mean, let's just put your qualifications on the table and compare them with his, shall we?
Yeah, go ahead.
So 30 years reporting on rail infrastructure and a deep, detailed understanding of HS2, thinks it's a brilliant idea. That would be Nigel Harris. Now, your turn.
Yeah, well, my term is, before you do that, first of all, it was sold as speed.
No, qualifications first. Qualifications first.
It was sold as speed. It was even in the name. It's not so damn fast. It's just over 200 miles an hour.
Yeah, qualifications first, John, if you would.
A lot of ancient woodlands.
The reason why you knew it was a bad idea from the start was based on...
No, I'm saying it's a good idea to invest in the infrastructure, in railways, in many parts where it's necessary.
Yes.
What people don't seem to realise within the M25, I don't know if you're one, I travel down regularly to the city, go to the eye hospital in London. How long do you think it takes me at the moment to travel from Crewe, which you would say is in the north, into the city in London, door to door? How long do you think?
Door to door is tricky to do because I don't know whether you hop on the tube or whether you get a taxi from the station, but you'd be looking at 2.5 hours roughly.
Yeah, well, you can't use a taxi now because of the price, and it's a car park in London at the moment.
Yes, but anyway, about 2.5 hours.
No, under 2 hours.
Right, really?
Okay. Cost of it, for me, sometimes below £20 return.
Yes.
Right. Was it necessary? Well, from a speed point of view, I think that destroys that argument to a point.
But the whole conversation today is about capacity, not speed, isn't it?
Exactly. They've changed the idea. Now, this is what
they haven't changed.
Me.
I mean, again, you see, if you listen to the bloke that spent 30 years reporting on it, for him it was always about capacity, and he thinks it was unfortunate that they put the word speed in it because of what people like you have ended up thinking, John.
Well, that's what the politicians tried to sell to us. I mean, if you've ever been in China or Japan, they're really fast there.
Yeah.
But we're not.
We're still talking about speed, aren't we? And what the fellow that I suggested you should have listened to said was that is a misconception.
Yeah, well, think of this. When it comes to capacity...
But how near to Crewe Station do you live?
Well, all the villages around, I have a house that is about 5 minutes, 7 minutes.
There we go. That's why I got confused. I presumed you'd be at least half an hour away from Crewe Station.
No,
because you're in Newcastle under Lyme.
the point is...
You're in Newcastle under Lyme, it says here.
Yeah, well...
How far is that from Crewe?
I don't live in Newcastle under Lyme.
Well, that's
Newcastle
why your
under
question
Lyme,
was unfair, John, wasn't it?
not really.
I needed your postcode. I needed your... And did you go to the Western Eye Hospital or the Eastern Eye Hospital?
Let me make my point.
Say again?
Okay, now when...
No, I've got to go to the news, John, but before I do, can I wish you a very happy wedding anniversary?
Very kind of you. Thank you, James.
It's for you and Mrs. John as well, not just for you. I want you to make sure you share those congratulations
I've changed
equally.
my opinion of you.
Well,
Thank you
I've
for
changed
that.
my opinion of you as well, whatever that means. Do you know, I'm such a child that quite often when I catch that, the way that bloke says my voice, I sometimes want to come back from the break and go, that's my name, don't wear it out, which was a popular phrase when I was about 11. Some days the 11-year-old is a little bit closer to the surface on other days, and on this programme that's often Thursdays, because of course Mystery Hour is with us in 10 minutes' time, and it is generally a much more light-hearted and possibly even juvenile entertainment than the other 14 hours that we spend together every week. Anyway, enough of that. David is in Sunderland to steer the conversation back to HS2 and train infrastructure. David, can you remember why you rang in? Because it was quite a while ago.
No, that's fine. How are you doing, James? You okay?
I'm all good, mate. What's on your mind?
Yeah, okay. Basically, I think you've touched on it in the argument. It's this. I've suddenly think the map of the UK has been redrawn. That the north clearly starts and ends at Leeds. It's ridiculous because I've never heard any mention to Sunderland, Newcastle, Durham, Edinburgh, Aberdeen, even going further north.
That extra stretch was the major upgrade. Was supposed to go from Leeds through York up to Newcastle, wasn't it? But you're right. The conversation that we've been conducting with the occasional nod towards the northeast has been stopping more or less at Leeds.
Absolutely, and I think so. If you were stood in London and you wanted to sort of use the high speed link to go north to Newcastle, why would you want to get a train to say Leeds and then have to change? It makes a mockery of the whole system. And as it goes at the minute, the times savings for any of the journeys, say from the south to the north, were minimal against the cost of the project. It's just ridiculous. They said you can shave off, say, 20 minutes here, half an hour there.
Yeah, but again, and not for the first time, you're proving the point that Nigel Harris made at the very top of the programme, was that we've all been labouring under, and I wonder how much responsibility the media bears for this, and of course the naming of the project as High Speed 2, but the main driving force for the project was not journey times, it was capacity. It was improving capacity, which would mean all the passengers go on the new lines and all the freight can go on the old lines. So the ripple effect of what this would have done for the country and the economy, and almost all of the research by boroughs and local councils in the affected areas confirms this, it would just have been a huge injection of activity and potentially cash into some of the poorest communities in the country. So it's not about shaving 10 minutes off a journey to London. It's about making sure you'd get a seat, making sure you'd get a train, and making sure that the rest of the railway could be dedicated to freight and other issues.
Well, just a couple of points on that. So this, I mean, my cynicism when it comes to the government and the words that come out of their mouth, it's just words. Do you know what I mean? It's just words. So I think this Saturday, as an example, and it has happened before, 2 football matches in the northeast. Newcastle's at home, Sunderland's at home. It's very unusual, but it does happen
because they usually do the calendar to avoid this clash.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's to do with
it's the cup games and the rescheduling, I imagine.
Yeah, exactly.
We have that problem in Kidderminster, David. I know what you're talking about. Don't laugh. We really do. We've had to reschedule a few games because we're still in the FA Cup at the moment, obviously.
No, well, my team's not as it goes. So we'll
know.
Over that. So this Saturday, so the northern trains will have a train that will go from Newcastle down the east, not the east main line, the coastline down to Hartlepool through to Middlesbrough. That will be made up of two carriages.
Right.
And it'll not even be one of these fancy trains that you see on the main line. It'll just be your bog standard. Yeah. So by the time that leaves Newcastle station, gets through I think there's one station in between that and Sunderland, that is full. That is full all the way to Middlesbrough.
So that is precisely the sort of thing that improved capacity, because it's not going to be running every day, is it? It's an exceptional circumstance, but the more capacity...
No, it's every day.
Is it? So you just catching a normal scheduled train?
Yes.
Oh,
absolutely.
I see. Crikey, I thought they'd put on a special service. Well, then again, that's even more the case. That the more capacity, the better that situation would be.
Well, no, because that's a captive line, where that line is going to be away from all the infrastructure improvements. So if you wanted to go from, say, Newcastle to Sunderland to Hartlepool down to Middlesbrough, that's your line. There isn't no expansion there. That is what you need to get. Unless you want to go down.
I see. Yeah, but they can't improve everything, can they? They can't improve every single line in the country.
Well, why not? Because if you
but they have to start somewhere, David. So they would start on York to Newcastle, and then you've got. So that would be the seaside line, as it were.
Yeah, but start with what you got. Start with what you've got. Basically, that line at the minute, that line at the minute from that the coastline can only have one train go in one direction, one the other. There's very, very limited space for a slow train to move across in the sleeper. It's very limited.
No, I hear you. But the fact that this only becomes an acute problem on the days when there's a game.
No, it doesn't. That's what I'm saying. So peak times, summertime, the kids are off and stuff. That train, if it's a 2-carriage train.
You remember at the top of the show, I said I was worried that I suffered from Londonitis.
Go on.
I think you might have the opposite condition here.
Because
it's a 2-carriage. No, I know, but listen, the line from Kidderminster to Worcester Shrub Hill is not ideal. I can't believe you have to walk across Birmingham now. If you want to get from London to Kidderminster, you've got to walk from New Street to Snow. I mean, we've all got complaints about the rail service, David. Yeah, of course you can, mate. Of course.
Can I put this to you?
Go on. Yeah.
So we're talking researchers. So basically, you're on about the north-south divide and stuff as well.
Yeah.
And I think on issues like this, especially when you have a Tory government in, what they tend to do is they'll throw a bit to the north to say, there you go, keep them happy. So
but then again, there's stuff. I hear you. I understand the point that you're making, but I think that you're letting the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Right.
Because you're getting the line from Leeds to Newcastle, it might not be the one that affects you the most. That gets a big upgrade.
But it's not, though. It's not going to get an upgrade.
No, it is. That's still getting an upgrade. It is.
It's not.
It's getting a significant line enhancement.
Go on then. Tell me how that's getting an upgrade, because it's going to be literally the same amount of trains going on the East Coast Main Line between Leeds, Newcastle, Edinburgh. It's going to be the same track.
It says it's getting. I don't know. I'm not Grant Shapps or Michael Green or whatever other name he's gone by in the last few years. It says here it's getting a significant line. Where's Nigel Harris when you need him? Honestly, a significant. Well, I don't know. But yeah, all right. I hear you. No, it might be just words, but I don't think it is just words, because that is one of the things that is staying. One of the things that is not being removed. But yeah, listen, I do stand by the suggestion that we're all going to think about our most local line and think that could be better, rather than necessarily looking at the big picture. But whether or not improving the line you describe would make a major difference to the economy of the area is a slightly different question to whether or not it would improve the lives of people who travel on it regularly. And I mean no criticism by that. I'm very conscious of my own Londonitis. I think you've got seaside line-itis. But both conditions, thankfully, are curable. 11:56, and the prescription is to listen to this programme more and ring in. For as long as it remains here, of course. Here's an interesting exchange in the House of Commons while we've been on air. Joe Stevens is the shadow Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport. Nadine Dorries, of course, great friend of this programme, is the actual Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport. And she tweeted last night to Laura Kunsberg, the political editor of the BBC. Laura, I very much like and respect you, but we both know that text is ridiculous, although we're nowhere near as ridiculous as the person, obviously totally desperate for your attention, who sent it. And the text that Laura Kunsberg, the political editor of the BBC, had sent said this: after PMQs, then liaison committee, PM then went to face his own MPs at the 1922 committee. One texts me to say he looked weak and sounded weak. Authority is evaporating. So the Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, who I think has deleted 2,000 tweets in total while she's been on that platform, including some about Britain's best loved broadcaster. Laura, I know, so that's that. I've read that to you now. You decide whether or not that sounds like a rebuke or a reprimand to the political editor of the BBC, Laura Kunsberg. I very much like and respect you, but we both know that is ridiculous, although nowhere near as ridiculous as the person obviously totally desperate for your attention who sent it, because this is what happened in the House of Commons a few minutes ago.
We have spent much of the past 2 weeks, Mr. Speaker, talking about standards in public office. And on this side of the House, we care deeply about the independence and the impartiality of the BBC. And I know the Secretary of State also cares, to the extent that she actually has the time to police the BBC political editor's tweets and publicly rebuke her. But would she agree with me that it would be highly inappropriate for a government minister overseeing licence fee negotiations to seek to influence editorial decisions, including how the Prime Minister was interviewed, and using the threat of reducing BBC licence fee funding whilst doing so?
So stay.
Well, that was 4 elements to that question, Mr. Speaker. So on the tweet, I did not rebuke Laura Kunsberg, somebody who is maybe the best in the business, actually. Very professional, very polite tweet. But some people, particularly some members opposite, do seem to have a problem understanding a composition of 240 characters. But the tweet was completely misinterpreted. I was not rebuking Laura Kunsberg, and never would. And thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oh, thank you.
I'll leave you to make your own mind up about that. But I mean, to Laura, I'd say at least she's not contacting your employer asking them to sack you.